incredibly sorry about that. We've never had that happen here. But I'm totally apologize, and the people on Zoom, I'm sorry. But Dr. Foss, it's great to have you. And before we begin, I guess I'll just introduce him. Dr. Scott Foss, as you know, is the Senior Paleontologist at the Bureau of Land Management. He has been with the agency for about 20 years. Before that, he was at the National Park Service for a handful of years. Also, he received his PhD from Northern Illinois University, and he is an expert in entelodonts, which is a pig-like creature, for those of you who are curious. And Dr. Foss, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn my camera. I'm gonna mute my audio, so that way, if people in the audience want to get up and get some food, that way the classroom ambience doesn't disrupt you. And I guess we will get started.
Do you have any donuts or anything for me? Or?
We have pizza. But
Enjoy. Yes. Yes. So today's a great day for me because I have been the division chief for education, cultural, and paleontological resources for the Bureau of Land Management. Today is my first day back as the senior paleontologist. So I took a job change, came back to being senior paleontologist, which is so great. I'm so, well, I actually started this about a month ago, but today's the official day. And I just thought I'd share with you, it's funny, right after this meeting, I am required to go to a new employee orientation for the Bureau of Land Management. So anyway, if I may share my screen, I'm going to tell a little story about the laws behind BLM, and then I'd like to finish early enough to have some discussion and chat. Let's see if this works here. Are you seeing this okay?
yes, sir.
Okay, great, thanks. So, so in 2009, the Paleontological Resources Preservation Act passed, and that was part of the Omnibus Public Lands Management law passed in the first 100 days of the Obama administration. So this was one of those many laws in that omnibus package. It reached its 14-year anniversary last week, or I guess it was a week ago Friday. PRPA turned 14. So it took us 13 and a half years to get rulemaking done on this law. So this is still hot on my mind now. This is what I've been doing pretty much full time for the last 14 years. And you were talking about entelodonts. It's a group my scientific research and the group I like to work on, and I'm looking forward to going back to talking about entelodonts again too. But today we're going to talk about the law behind public land management, and I'll tell you what it applies to and so on. Let's see here. There we are. So the Paleontological Resources Preservation Act is a law. And when I give various versions of this presentation, I have to explain to folks, and I assume I don't have to explain to you, the difference between a law and then the regulation is how the executive branch, how the Department of Interior actually implements this law. And then we have our internal policy of how we do it here within BLM. And our policy is both what and how of it. And I think about laws in terms of what the law is and then how we manage that law. And so a little history of PRPA. It goes back to 1983. There was a law in Congress, the Paleontological Resources Conservation Act. It was reintroduced in various forms over the years. In 1992, the Vertebrate Paleontological Resources Protection Act, notice its parallels in construction to the Archaeological Resources Protection Act, and it was built on the skeleton of ARPA. It was introduced by Max Baucus in 1992. It created a huge amount of discussion in the profession. It was very, very, it was, I want to say it's controversial. I think all laws are controversial when they're first introduced, but this one would have had much stronger rules on protection of fossil resources. It was written a lot like ARPA was written. And so really struck fear in a lot of people, especially like industry didn't like the idea of having a new law with these restrictions in it and so on. And then of course, commercial collecting community was dead set against it. And what's important about the Vertebrate Paleontological Resource Protection Act, or what we call the Bacchus Bill, is that it really influenced subsequent legislation. First of all, in 1996, the Fossil Preservation Act by the Johnson Bill was an attempt by the commercial lobby, and I'm grouping this group all together, but folks who collect fossils for profit, to really try and soften the Bacchus Bill. And it was like, okay, you have your Bacchus Bill, and they introduced a competing bill that said, okay, but commercial collecting should be allowed in these circumstances. And the hope was that they would meet in the middle with something. That's not what happened. In 2009, or sorry, 1999, it's not on here. Actually, I think it came out in 2000, was the report to Congress. And there was a report to Congress put out by the Secretary of Interior of what it will require to manage fossils on public land. And in that report, number one recommendation was, let's not manage fossils on tribal lands. Leave that to the tribes. And then number two, it said, okay, this is what the bureaus need to manage lands. And it did not address the commercial dealers' concerns. So there was a pretty strong lobby against that, against this law, PRPA, because it did not facilitate commercial collection on public lands of certain fossils. And but PRPA was introduced in 2001. It was introduced in 5 successive Congresses, finally passed in 2009. And the story about the commercial collection community is important, and I'll circle around to why that becomes important here. But PRPA says, first of all, it's based on that report to Congress in 2009, and everything I'm talking about here will be a link to here at the end. It's www.blm.gov/paleontology, and I'll share that again. But PRPA sets out 3 basic mandates to the bureaus, and this law is really written to the bureaus rather than being written to the public. It's really telling the bureaus how to manage paleontological resources. And so number one is to manage using scientific principles and expertise. A very powerful statement, a very strong, a very excellent statement. And has really, with a public land management law, instead of just telling you do this, do this, do this, by putting out this broad vision of managing using scientific principles and expertise, it's really been a nice book for us. None of other laws don't have that necessarily. It also lays out a mandate for inventory and monitoring. Find out what you have on the land before you start managing. It's just common sense, but by calling that out, that's also very powerful. Unfortunately, our bureaus have not put together a plan for inventory and monitoring. Inventorying your lands requires money. It requires, people to do the work. It requires resources. And there's been an unwillingness to really fund this law. Now that we have a regulation, maybe that'll change, but it's not there yet. And number 3 was an education program. Educate the public about the importance of paleontological resources. Very important, very central to the mission of the land management bureaus, and really great that it's spelled out right here. And so the various bureau education programs can point to this law as a mandate for their education program. And that's also been just a real excellent statement. So these 3 things that the law requires are really powerful. They're central to what we do. Unfortunately, they don't have any teeth with them. Okay, we think inventory is great. We'll do it when we have the funding to make it happen. PRPA also provides some authorities, and these authorities are for permitting. You're going to collect on public lands, you need a permit. It requires collected items under permit to go into museum collections, and it provides casual collection as a right to the public. So in this case, casual collection means collection of common non-vertebrate fossils without a permit. And the word casual implicitly means without a permit. On public land management, casual tends to mean, or does mean, casual means without prior authorization. So if you come to public lands and you want to walk to the top of that hill, you just walk up there. These are open public lands. That's a casual use of the land. You can just go do it. If, on the other hand, there's a trailhead and it says you need a trail permit to climb this mountain, that's not casual. You need a permit to do that. You need an authorization to do it. So that's the difference between casual and non-casual. This provides for casual collection of certain fossils. And that, which really invites the public into paleontology. This is different than the Archaeological Resource Protection Act in archaeology. There's no invitation for the public to come out and collect archaeological resources on public land. Paleontology does have that. And as a side thought, that's caused some confusion amongst a lot of folks who don't know the difference between a paleontological resource and an archaeological resource. An archaeological resource being artifacts left behind by human hands, whereas a paleontological resource is evidence of past life on planet Earth, not placed there by humans. It's a natural resource. And so it's very different, both legally and fundamentally. But it's especially the public and very often our leadership will just confuse the two. Here you're collecting artifacts. No, the word artifact means collected by human hands, or put there by human hands, crafted by humans. A dinosaur bone is not an artifact, unless a human picked it up and carved it and made something different out of it. But otherwise, it's not an artifact. It was left behind by a dinosaur, not a human. So then we get to the regulations to implement PRPA, and these are what took so many years. So in 2015, the Forest Service was able to get some regulations out under this law. So the U.S. Forest Service, Department of Agriculture, put regulations out in 2015. The Department of Interior regulations went out in 2022. August, they were published in August of 22, went into effect on September 1st, 2022. So 6 months, we're just over 6 months of having regulations here for Bureau of Land Management, Bureau of Reclamation, National Park Service, and U.S. Fish and Wildlife. We're all Department of the Interior. And then we drop down from there, we call step down policy. The step down policy, the BLM, there's 4 areas of PRPA that are not clear enough, or 4 areas of the regulation that are not clear enough that we need to parse out. And these 4 areas have to do with confidentiality, because the law requires confidentiality. It provides an exemption from FOIA for the location of paleontological resources, but it also allows the bureaus to share the location of paleontological resources when that meets certain a certain threshold. And that certain threshold is pretty much if it furthers the management of the resource, like inviting people to a quarry to see a dinosaur being excavated is allowed, because that furthers our mission for education. Casual collection, and this is explaining what casual collection is and is not, because remember, casual collection is allowing the public to collect without a permit certain fossil resources. So we need to have that together. Permitting, what the requirements are for receiving a permit, and then something we call the potential fossil yield classification, which we'll talk about in a moment here. It's something we use for planning within the Bureau. Starting out with confidentiality, this is the one that, and a big surprise to us was our professional community was very, very concerned about confidentiality. In the 1990s, we were on the heels of some very high-profile theft of fossil resources, and there was a big push to have a law enforcement component to this paleontology law. Part of that was having confidentiality. We don't put out treasure maps to the dinosaurs because people are going to steal them. By the time the law passed in 2009, our thinking had changed. And when I say our thinking, society's thinking had changed. Confidentiality is kind of a thing of the past. People see a dinosaur bone, they put it on social media, and that picture is geo-referenced and the world knows where it is. it kind of, the genie was out of the bottle, and how are we going to deal with confidentiality? Well, the law does allow the sharing of the location. As I said, when it furthers the purpose of the law, when it does not create risk of harm or theft or destruction of the resource. And we've interpreted this to be both harm to people accessing the resource, but also obviously harm to the resource itself, and also in accordance with other laws. And so in some cases, we've withheld information on the location of a fossil because there's an endangered plant located at the exact same spot. We're like, okay, we're just not going to discuss that. We'll still talk about the nature of it. We have this dinosaur out there, but we're not giving location of where it is because of these other resources. If a researcher needs location, we'll share that with the researcher, and we'll make it clear there's endangered species plants. I mean, this time of year, do this. But we've also in BLM, and this is BLM specific, come up with a catch-all 0.1 decimal degrees latitude, longitude. And what does that look like? Well, here we go. So in this case, the upper map here shows the actual location of paleontological resources of fossils. This is the treasure map, the top one. The bottom one, by reducing the data to 0.1 decimal degree, each one of those dots is within 6 miles of the actual fossil. That's plenty of distance to protect the fossil from someone going out and poaching the fossil, but it still allows people to do statistical analyses of where Tyrannosaurus rex is found within the state of Montana. When you have a nationwide map like this, these dots are almost six miles across. I mean, it doesn't cause problems with that. If somebody's doing research where they need to know the exact location, we can share that with them because doing research furthers the purpose of this law. So there's not a problem there. This allows us to share with the public carte blanche. Here's where the fossils are being found, and people want to know for various reasons. Sometimes news media wants to say a new Tyrannosaur was found, and they want to put a dot on the state of Wyoming and say it was over here. Fine. And they're fine to do their dot within 6 miles of the actual location. But that's what's happening on the bottom here is by reducing it to 0.1 decimal degree, it's a compromise that has satisfied a large number of people. And it's also a standard that's used in other for other resources such as wildlife, butterflies, or an endangered species of cactus, things like that. That's the same kind of data standard that's used for that. So they'll say, okay, these rare birds that you found in this general area, but again, we don't want to tell you where the nest is exactly. Fish and Wildlife is charged with preserving some of that information. So it's consistent with that. It's what museums are using for their data. And again, when a researcher needs to go to the exact location or we need to go to it for management purposes, we can dial in and do that because it furthers the purpose of the law to do that. So that was the compromise we came up for confidentiality. But the big change was 30 years ago, professionals wanted us to keep this confidential. Now it's the professional community saying, I want to publish where my stuff is. And we have to say, well, no. And it's been a real change in the way people view it. Good example of how things change over time and the time it took for this law to come out, for that to actually change. Casual collection, the BLM has allowed casual collection on public lands since the beginning. It's always been allowed. It was specifically added to the code around 1970s. It was done before that, but in the 1970s, saying, okay, there's a free use exemption for petrified wood, which is a mineral under the law. And then there's a casual use authorization, different word, casual use authorization that included paleontology. PRPA took paleontology out of the casual use authorization and put it into the casual collection authorization. What's nice about this, though, is that to legal scholars, we got to get it right. Is it free use? Is it casual use? Or is it casual collection? 3 different things under 3 different authorities. But to the public, it means I can go pick up a small piece and take it home. It doesn't matter which authority, to them, doesn't matter which authority they're exercising. But what's important with casual collection is that before it was just allowed by the Bureau, and now it's a right. The public has a right to collect common fossils from the ground. And the regulation states that means the reasonable allowance is 25 pounds per person per day. Sometimes that's too much. Sometimes that's not enough, depending on what you're collecting. But that is the catch-all. It's a compromise that seems to be working well. And the Bureau has the authority to lessen that to say 10 pounds because of what the resource is right here. But that would require a plan amendment, that would require notification to the public. The BLM cannot just arbitrarily say, we're going to change this to 5 pounds. Can't do that. So that's becomes very important here at casual collection, the reasonable amount. 25 pounds per person today happens to be the same amount as the free use exemption for petrified wood, 25 pounds per day, which is great because the public knows 25 pounds. It's a number they can remember. It's a number law enforcement can remember. If you're under 25 pounds, you're good to go. And yes, someone could game the system and do 25 pounds of petrified wood and 25 pounds of fossils. They're found in different places. It's not likely people are going to do both in the same day. But non-vertebrate means a common invertebrate and plant paleontological resources. So we simplified that by saying non-vertebrate because that's how we tend to think about it. But that also catches things like, what about fossil algae? It's not technically a plant, now is it? It's a non-vertebrate. We're going to treat it like a non-vertebrate. You can collect fossil algae. Non-commercial personal use is pretty self-explanatory. Non-powered hand tools means no motors and no mechanized power source. Now, in the early versions of this, it said no handles over 4 feet long and things like that because of the destruction that caused. That went away. It just means without mechanized power source. And then we have negligible disturbance. You can't make a huge hole that you can see from space or, like this. You need permission to do that kind of work. But collecting off the surface is allowed. And that's the casual collection. And so the other thing we got, and this was the #1 comment we got from the public when the proposed rule went out, the #1 comment was, the law says the public can collect a common non-vertebrate paleontological resource. And the child collects this little trilobite. How do they know if this trilobite is common or not? They're not an expert in paleontology. And even I'm an expert in paleontology, but am I an expert in trilobites? How do we know? And so we said a non-vertebrate fossil is considered common until it's recognized to not be common. This means, because the #1 comment was, oh my gosh, law enforcement's gonna, confiscate my RV and put my child in jail. Children are gonna go to jail. There was a lot of hot air about that. And so we just came out and said it. Non-vertebrate fossils are common until we identify otherwise. So that puts the responsibility on the Bureau to post an area and say, in this area, these non-vertebrate fossils are not common. Either don't collect here or don't collect this fossil or that fossil, but it puts the burden on the Bureau. And we just had a case last week and it worked. A child went into a museum. This is just exactly the scenario we've been preparing for. A child went into a museum with a small fossil they found, casual collecting, completely legal, and showed it to the curator and the curator to get it identified. And the curator said, oh, wow, that's a new something. Isn't that amazing? And the child's parents were like, we'd like to donate it. This is great. They didn't go to jail. They got recognized. They got recognized for finding something neat and cool, and it found its way into a public collection. The child is named on the discovery. It's just positive all the way around. And this is what we hoped for. Instead of people being afraid that, if they find out my child found something, oh, that's not common, slap the handcuffs on the kid. I mean, this is what we were hearing a lot, and it didn't happen just last week. And it's, small town paper is going to write up this kid who found a neat fossil and brought it to a museum and discovered that it was kind of neat. And we, BLM, would never have known about that fossil if the public hadn't collected it and been a participant and a partner in discovering this. So I think this worked. And so here it is. The public really thought that if they legally collected a non-vertebrate and then later found it to be. Finally, we get to permitting. Permitting just talks about you must have a permit and what it takes to have a permit. I'll kind of glaze over that one so we can get on to the next one. In this case, BLM, we're simplifying the permit application to be, instead of having 3 types of permits and you have to whatever to get these 3 types of permits. Essentially, you have to be qualified to do the work you propose to do. And we did not put an educational component on it. We get into issues of social justice and so on. Some of the paleontologists who know the most about collecting and identifying fossils in the field don't have a PhD in paleontology. And I know a number of PhD paleontologists who are fantastic researchers. They do, geochemical analyses, and they wouldn't recognize a T-Rex skull if it was sitting on the ground in front of them, So you have to be qualified to identify and collect the fossils you propose to collect and have a museum willing to receive them. But we're not going to dig down. We want to see that your education matches the work you want to do, but PhD doesn't mean it, or a master's doesn't mean it. Where in archaeology, you're required to have a master's degree to get a permit to collect archaeological resources. And I think that's something we're going to have to review, because degrees don't always mean what they used to mean. So that's something to be considering here. And finally, the potential fossil yield classification is something that BLM uses as a tool for planning, and it's super powerful. So in this map on the lower right here, what we see is the geologic units, and they're mapped by geologic units, and these are put together by state geological surveys. So the maps exist, they're free, they're out there, anybody can get these maps. You download them this afternoon if you want. What we've done is we've said, okay, in this case, Cedar Mountain Formation, the Morrison Formation, these are formations in the West that are known to have lots and lots of fossils. Those are in red. The ones in the pale yellow, those are very low potential to have paleontological resources. Maybe they're granites, exposed granite, not likely to have fossils in that. So we code all rocks or all geologic formations on a scale of 1 to 5. 1 being very low potential to have fossils, 5 being a very high potential to have fossils. Just if you were to throw a dart at this map, if you hit red, you're more likely to hit fossils than if you hit a pale yellow. That's all this map does. There are no actual fossils on this map. These maps are public. Anyone can look at them. And in this case, we've taken a bunch of oil and gas lease sales and superimposed them over this site. Each one of these lease sales is a separate sale, has a different number attached to it. And when we're going through analyzing these, we can look at which lease sales are going to have a high potential of impacting paleontological resources versus which ones will have a low potential. This would be the same thing if we're doing an energy corridor through there, a pipeline, maybe a road, maybe a mountain bike trail, any number of reasons. You just superimpose it onto this PFYC map, and you know where to put your attention. Our Bureau has 5 paleontologists. We can't look at every single land management proposal out there. But with this map, every lead in every office of BLM can do the original analysis. And on this, if you dial it in and look, there's maybe 20 or 25 of these parcels that are in the deep red. The ones that are not in the deep red, the manager could responsibly say, okay, we're going to put a standard stipulation. You might find fossils. Stop and let us know if you do. And with the red ones, they say, before you start moving dirt, we need you to have a paleontologist out there looking at it. For instance, that's the way we might manage this. So this potential fossil yield classification is it's based in science, but it allows a non-specialist to make the first call on whether we need to do more work on paleontology. It's been very popular. Especially amongst the proponents that want to do work on public lands, they can look at this map before they even make a proposal and say, oh, well, here's where the fossils are. I wish we had this for all the resources. And I think for a bureau that only has 5 paleontologists, having this tool is just very helpful. And so looking at the time, it took, how many decades to get the law passed? It took 13.5 years just to get the regulations in play. And now we're putting together the implementation policy for BLM. I told you the 4-point policy that we put into play 6 months ago, but now we have to flesh that out and really put out our policy manual. The policy manuals talk inward to the BLM employees. As far as the public's going to look at the regulations. How does the rubber hit the road? How does this affect us? And so with that down in the lower right, blm.gov/paleontology, On that page, you should have access to everything I've talked about here. And if not, I invite you to contact me directly and I can share any more information with you. And with that, I'll turn it back to you. I'd like to answer questions if you have any.
Sure. And let me walk over to this side. That's kind of unorthodox. And, we've never had a technical difficulty in this classroom until today. And again, I apologize to the people in here. Hopefully when I record or upload the presentation, the audio will be fixed. And Dr. Foss, do you mind sending me a copy of your PowerPoint? If
No, I do not mind. I do not mind. In fact,
yeah, the PowerPoint will be
drop a copy into this right now. Let's see, because I anticipated this and I made a PDF version of it. I'll drop it in the chat right now if people can get a hold of it. Let me look at how big it is.
Sure. And if we have any issue, I'll send an email.
It's 2 megabytes. That shouldn't be too bad. But I can email you a copy as well in case this didn't.
But does anyone in the audience have any questions? Because I might have one, and if there's any on Zoom, feel free to chime in. But I forgot to mention, Dr. Foss, I contacted Dr. Santucci. He was in the field until last week. So
I just had a meeting with him in the hour before we talked now. So
he's busy.
We talk. Yeah, he just got back and I invited him over to join us, and he's like, yeah, he's just back in the office today. So I was his first meeting this morning.
But I do have a question about obviously America has plenty of fossil beds, Hell Creek, Morrison Formation. My question being geared towards the Morrison Formation, because if I'm not mistaken, it spans through Colorado, a little bit of Utah, am I right? Because I know you and Dr. Kirkland.
Utah.
Yeah. Is
Montana
there
and Wyoming and South Dakota.
Is there any portion of the Morrison? Because I know some of it is within the John Day National Monument. Is there any portion of Morrison that isn't protected by federal land?
Oh my goodness, yes. So Morrison is not part of John Day in Oregon, but the Morrison Formation spans from New Mexico, where I'm sitting right now, all the way up through Utah, Colorado, up into Wyoming, all the way across to South Dakota. I'm not sure if it nips the corner of North Dakota, but goes well into Montana too. And it's late Jurassic formation, 220 million years ago, give or take a few days. Lots and lots of dinosaurs. Most of the dinosaurs we grew up seeing, Allosaurus, Brontosaurus, Apatosaurus, all those are from the Morrison Formation, Stegosaurus. And yeah, if you look at the public lands, great amounts of that are on public lands, state lands. The type specimens, a lot of dinosaurs are found in state lands in Colorado. The Morrison Formation is named for the town of Morrison, which is near Golden, Colorado. And then there's a huge amount of Morrison that's on private land, especially in Montana and South Dakota. So these dinosaurs we're seeing go to auction are coming out of the Morrison Formation, are collected legally on private ranches in Montana and South Dakota.
Thank you. Any other questions from the audience? Any on Zoom? I'm just gonna check the chat.
I'm trying to share this with you and it's not catching, so I'll have to email it to you.
Yes, sir. Sounds
Put my
good.
presentation.
Well, thank you, Dr. Foss, for your presentation today. Let's give him. Thank you. And I'll send you guys this email if you have any questions. And I guess me and you will be in touch. And
okay, yeah.
Dr. Kirkland, I think that conference is still going on in Utah, isn't it?
Yes, that'll be in the first week of June, I think. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, first week of June, Jim's hosting a conference there. I'm gonna miss it. So I'll be in town a week early. Like I'm not going back.
All right, well, thank you so much.
Oh, you're very welcome. Very welcome.
Let me end